mister. This is my second reflection video. Okay, so slavery in the Americas it wasn't just like a specific institution. And after like reading all the four sources, I see that the scale of trade was super big, as well as very cruel and brutal, since it left such a big lasting impact. And mainly I made connections to, well, I'll get more specific into like what specific connections I made between the sources themselves and the course description, but I found almost all of them to be fall under the category of Connection 2.4 Transatlantic Trade Constitution 5, since it identified patterns among or connections between historical developments and processes, as well as explain causes and effects of transatlantic slave trades over time, which was a Unit 2 learning objective. Okay, so I learned that like the horrors of the Middle Passage are very much like captured in, what was his name? Olaura Equinos, that he said, quote, "The closeness of this place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ships, which was so crowded that each had secretly room to turn himself, almost suffocating us," end quote. And he basically described the air as, quote, "unfit for respiration," end quote. And the voyage as, quote, "a scene of horror almost inconceivable," which is crazy in my opinion, because it shows how the slaves were treated like less than human, and the way of transporting them was like very, like they were cargo. They weren't even considered as people that have needs to, basic like human needs to survive. And I connected this to how I said before, 2.4, mainly the thematic focus of work exchange and technology, the interplay between markets, private enterprise, labor, technology, and government policy, and how it shaped the American economy. And this I connected since I saw that the slaves were used as basically as an incentive to create work, and not to create work, but like to do the work that couldn't be done by indentured servants. And on the voyage, like 1749 Rhode Island sloop, 37 enslaved people died during the crossing, with more dying soon after. However, like investor Robert Lexington dismissed this like enormous loss of life as an, quote, "an accident not to be helped." And he also like very coldly said that, quote, "we should have made a golden voyage," end quote. And this basically is a very like sharp contrast between Egwin's agony and Livingston's profits, and they show how slavery reduced people to, how I said before, like commodities. And Ira Berlin explained that slavery changed over time, moving from societies with slaves to true slave societies, since he writes in this quote, "Slavery took root in mainland North America, shaping the economy, politics, and culture. In places like Virginia and Maryland, enslaved families began to grow naturally, while in South Carolina and Georgia, contrast new arrivals from like the reinforced cultural ties." And basically like he reminds us about that despite bondage, enslaved people were able to create their own families, cultivate religion, and pass on language and tradition. This shows a lot of resilience even in conditions designed to strip them of their own humanity. Again, I made a connection to 2.4, but also I made a connection from last video from 2.1, which talked a lot about like what incentivized people and how to Europe to travel to the Americas, and I think this was another like cause of that, since it brought a lot of work, like the work it took to bring the slaves could have been an incentive to do the voyage to the Americas, because those like slave merchants were able to make a lot of profit of it. And I also made a connection to topic 2.6, slavery in the British colonies, especially the thematic focus that said work exchange and technology, and between private labor, technology, policy shape American economy. So this is the same thing as the last one. So Stephen Mitz, I think was his name, helped us see that like slavery was such a global scale topic. From 1526 to 1867, some 12.5 million captured men, women, and children put on ships in Africa, and 10.7 million arrived in the Americas. This is a quote. And then he like stresses that nearly 2 million died and did not survive the Middle Passage.